before I feel comfortable marking that requirement as met. Okay, Chris, tell us a little bit about Titan Civil Engineering.
All right. Well, Titan's a civil engineering firm. We specialize in various civil engineering projects, but we do have a decent sized revenue that's generated from our DoD contracts, mainly, bridge and highway rehab projects. We typically, are hired to do some design assessments and studies for highway projects and various locations, and our physical offices, they spread out. I mean, our need is full scope, meaning, CMMC level 1 is full scope. So all our offices are most likely need to be authorized or at least certified to handle FCI data. Infrastructure, typical Microsoft infrastructure, hybrid. We do use a platform called Ignite, which is a cloud-based storage platform that has various levels of controls, but mainly for collaboration. Again, typical infrastructure, firewalls, endpoint management, conditional access policies, Intune for endpoint for managing our devices, and then VPN access. That's kind of a summary of the environment.
All right. Well, great, Chris. Thanks for providing with that overview. That gives me some context as I ask you questions throughout this assessment. Yeah, sounds like you all have some pretty robust IT controls in place. I'm anticipating this is going to be a smooth assessment for you, but let's see. We'll find out. All right, Chris, can you see my screen with the requirements?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what I'll use to guide me through. This is a CMMC proof tool that I mentioned. And as you see, we have the requirement, and then we also have, actually, let me go back. So this is level 2. So I don't think you're ready for level 2 yet, right? You didn't sign up for that. Let's go to level 1. These are all, did I mark any of these? Let's see. So let's set you up in real time. So let's add an assessment. Titan. And civil engineering. Actually, the wrong place. It's always hard to type when someone's watching you. All right, so we're going to call this our self-assessment. And we're doing level 1. Is that correct, Chris? Level 1?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's do level 1. Let's start. Okay, here we go. So for level 1 under access control, it's the main we're starting off with. You see you have the requirement here, but we also have, for this one, we have 6 assessment objectives. So in order for me to mark this requirement as met, you have to meet all of the assessment objectives. In this example, let's say you met 5 out of the 6, then that means that that requirement we've marked is not met. Is that clear?
Yep.
All right, Chris, let's jump into it. So tell me more about just your access control. So if I understand correctly, you said for Titan Civil Engineering, all of the endpoints are in scope for level 1?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So how are you managing access control for those endpoints and identifying those users who have access?
Okay. So, as far as user access, let's say our HR system kind of controls, or at least starts. Controls our identity management, meaning that all users are created through HR, and there's some automation we have. We're Active Directory hybrid environment, but those users are created through HR. So the users, once they're onboarded, they have to. Every employee has to go through background check, etc. Once they accept their position, then that information flows to our Active Directory system, where the users are created. Depending on their role, they'll be added to certain groups that gives them access to certain systems. As far as our endpoints, We're kind of a zero trust environment. Therefore, the devices, they have to meet certain compliance, antivirus, secure boot, some basic things, minimum OS before they gain access to any of the environment. So that's the same thing with our mobile devices, iOS, Androids. Those devices are not, unless they meet our compliance, they can't access any of our platforms.
Okay. Did you mention the name of the mobile device solution that you're using?
We use Intune.
Intune. Okay. Mm-hmm. Got it. And just to confirm, there are no BYOD devices in your environment?
Not in the environment. People can use their personal devices to access things like email, but they have to enroll the devices.
Okay.
So they can't, unless they, go through the enrollment process through Intune, download the profile, et cetera. And then of course, we can't check compliance unless they enroll their devices.
Right. Okay.
But that's only for, like I said, that's only for email. Nobody can bring their personal devices in the network.
Okay. All right. And as far as the FCI that's received from your DoD client, how do you typically receive that FCI?
Sometimes they provide some area that we can download from their systems. Sometimes it's email. Maybe they'll bring it in on a flash drive.
Okay. Got it. Now, as far as the flash drives, how do you control those?
Anything that comes in, anything gets plugged into our environment and it gets scanned for any malware. That's just the nature of the way our system works. And then, of course, those authorized individuals, they'll transfer the data to those project areas that are also locked down by role-based access.
Okay. And then last question on this one, in regards to those mobile devices, the personal devices that can be enrolled through Intune, what's that profile for Intune? Are you requiring encryption, certain password complexity? What is the profile?
For mobile devices, yes, there's password complexity requirement. Using the Intune controls, any applications, like for instance Outlook, Teams, we use application protection policies. Therefore, anything that's stored company related is encrypted, and it's an own container, depending on whether you use Android or iOS. But that data is encrypted, it's protected, using our protection policies. As far as and again, they only have access to the 365 platform, so nobody has direct access to. Nobody's personal device has access to data outside of the Teams or Outlook collaboration tools.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move along. I'm satisfied with the responses you provided for that one. Okay, let's move on to transaction and function controls. So how are you documenting the transaction and functions that users are permitted? So whether they are admin, standard user, also the type of functions they can print, service accounts, things like that.
So outside of our administrators, our IT team, which we do, we list, of course, not only their roles, their titles, but we use rollbacks. Like I said, RBAC. We're a Microsoft shop, so we also use PIM, which allows them to we give them access to what they need. Meaning, if they need to manage certain areas, they're only eligible to check out those roles that allows them to manage those areas. So service desk person cannot check. Let me back up. So our IT team, they have two different accounts. They have a standard account, and of course they have their admin account. And that admin account is what we give roles to, which of course is driven by their who they are and what their roles are. So that's documented as far as what their roles are based on their and of course their titles. As far as our users, outside of accounting, legal, those sensitive areas where those individuals have access to. For the majority of everybody else, they have access to everything. Well, not everything, but they have access to all project data.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned. Okay, got it. So you mentioned with the RBAC roles, they're documented. Where do you document those roles? Is it like a spreadsheet or
in our spreadsheet in our IT area?
Okay, awesome. And definitely, I'm glad to hear you mention with the IT, you have a standard account and then basically a privileged admin account. And are those for the admin account? Do you ensure that those IT personnel are only using an admin account when you need elevated privileges, not for just surfing LinkedIn or just basic non-privileged activities?
They can't mix roles. I mean, the way we prevent that, we use Cisco Umbrella, and basically, we prevent access to internet outside of the Microsoft backplane to those accounts. So if I logged on, to my Edge browser as my .admin, as my admin account, I can't browse Google. I can only browse, Azure.
Okay. All right. So you have a technical control in place to ensure that. Oh, excellent. That's a good approach. So let's move on to the external connections. How are you identifying those external connections and controlling them as far as with which connections in-scope systems can connect to?
That's a tough one. Considering the nature of SaaS platforms, we can only document what people can use internally, but externally, unless the client demands that we can only use, for instance, Dropbox, we haven't put anything in place to prevent access to those areas. Outside, again, I mentioned Ignite, mentioned 365, but documenting the external controls, meaning like what sites that's what you're referring to, right? Like what they're trying to access or where they can store data.
Yes.
Yeah.
And make sure you're identifying them. And more so, controlling, limiting. Now, you did mention the firewall earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That's typically what we see, where we at least be able to identify those external connections and maybe or proxy controlling.
As far as protection, yes. Well, we do have means to prevent access to malicious sites, etc. Like we use Cisco Umbrella. So those are preventing any access to. We specify, of course, what classifications, classification sites, like for instance, malicious sites, anything that's going to get us in trouble, porn sites, etc. Nobody can access that data on a Titan system.
Okay. Yeah, I think that meets the standard. Now, one thing we'll want to see, and I'll follow up with you later for more evidence, fictionally, is basically like the being able to list out like which authorized control external connections. So you could say, okay, these systems are authorized to access Ignite or access Microsoft. So kind of having that list, because if you see here where it's saying the connection to external systems are identified. So whether you're pulling that directly off the firewall or you have it just documented in a spreadsheet, but you do kind of want to have a white list ultimately, which I know is challenging nowadays, but yeah, that's essentially what the assessment objective calls for.
Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting, because I kind of read that as being able to document, for instance, what's authorized to store the data, because in a sense where we working with a prime or sub, and they store their data in OneDrive or Dropbox. Those are that's always a moving target. Like when do we know that they're going to store data here and there? But as far as controlling types of external access based on some sort of classification, whether it's dangerous or not. Yes, we have that in place.
Okay. Yeah, and that's another reason, especially at level 2, where a lot of organizations choose to use a CUI enclave and not have their entire network in scope, because CMMC is, the requirements are restrictive. And this is an example of one of them, where it's just in the normal functions of doing business, it's really challenging to track all of those external connections. But if you limit it to enclave, now it's like, okay, people that are working in this enclave, they only really need to communicate with the DoD, Ignite. You can have really minimize it. So that's what
that's definitely the plan. We know that that's going to be a little more restrictive because you got to control the flow.
Yeah, and at level 2, certainly I would want to be seeing those external connections documented, so it's clear whenever it's a connection made to something that's not on that white list. It's like, okay, why is that connection being made? And for the audience, I'm not marking all these as met, not because Chris hasn't met them, just because at the end of this domain, I'm going to ask you what are your thoughts if you feel you've met them. So I didn't bias you all too much. All right. So, Chris, we're almost home as far as the access control domain. Let's see. As far as public control and public information, do you all host any public-facing systems?
Yes, for websites and social media, yes.
Okay, yes, that's included. Talk to me about your process for making sure that employees don't post any federal contract information on your public-facing systems.
Well, I mean, we have a policy that basically states, that encourages employees don't do that. We have, our authorized source of that information comes from our marketing team. They have an established guideline and process that guides the whole entire editorial process, and essentially who approves. Of course, our marketing head of marketing is the person that's going to approve anything that's published in a public facing area. But it's driven by their policies and procedures, and again, we have a policy that states that only that we need to be cautious, or at least be cognizant of what we post, be responsible. But anything related to our projects, not just FCI, is really, needs to go through marketing.
Okay. Understood. So who approves that before, as far as that workflow, who is the final approver before publishing?
The head of marketing.
Marketing. Okay. All right. So if someone from marketing wants to post something, do they have to get approval, let's say you or someone else outside of marketing? Is there any separation of duties?
No, it definitely comes. It starts and ends with them, and it's strictly enforced.
Okay, strictly enforced. Now, the challenge I would have in terms of their I guess the concern I would have, and rephrase it, is if they're properly trained to identify federal contract information. Mm-hmm. Do they have that knowledge to be able to identify it?
Well, I mean, in the context of CMMC today, I mean, I can't really say they do. I mean, as far as what's documents that are tagged CUI, maybe we're talking about level 2 now, but for us, if it's flagged a federal project, then everything within that project is handled differently.
Okay. That's a good approach.
So there's really no, again, it's, the project, it's federal or not. That's it.
Okay. All right. So in the event that, so would it be marketing? So they do the approval before they publish. Who's performing the reviews in terms of like checking the websites to see if it is FCI on the website or link social media account?
It would be marketing. They're responsible for that.
Okay. So in an event, addressing this assessment objective here. So in an event where marketing determines, oops, we posted FCI on our website or on our LinkedIn, does the documented policy have a process for how to respond to that incident?
They would have to inform the director of federal business. Okay. And then they would handle it on how, they would. I imagine they're going to have to, decide whether they need to contact our contractor that's in charge of the project, etc.
Okay. Yeah, it's typically a good best practice to have within your, basically evoking your incident response plan. If that's, because that is going to be an incident.
Data leakage.
FCI leakage. So we want to make sure we have following the process to remove it. Yeah, cool. All right. So you made it through access control. That's one of the tougher ones. Let's see. Let's get, if I can get to the audience and see what they think. My poll. All right, audience. Let's launch the poll and let me know what your thoughts are. If based on Chris's responses, you think that Titan Civil Engineering has satisfied the access control requirements. So there are 4 for level 1. A moment to respond. Right. So based on the responses I received so far, looks like you're doing good, Chris. You're off to a good start. We have 2 met. We do have 1 not met, and I invite anyone who submitted not met to sharing the comments, or we even have time where if you want to come off mute for a moment and share what additional information you would like Chris to provide to move you from not met to met. While we do that, as far as only one I probably would have marked as not met would have been this last one, as far as I didn't have a warm and fuzzy that you currently have a process in place for removing FCI. Okay. And then also, I would like to see more separation of duties. So I would like to see, I think it's just good best practice. I would recommend potentially having marketing send it to either you, someone in your team, or someone with the cybersecurity experience to be the final approver before they publish. They want to see some type of separation of duties there. So it kind of ties into this review process. Yeah. So at this point, they're kind of, like I said, it starts with them and ends with them. So there could be ripe for abuse. Not to say that your marketing department would do that, but just this is a best practice.
Okay.
All right. Let's move on to the next one. Let me check the chat real quick, see if I have any feedback. All right. So moving on to identification and authentication, and you'll see a lot of these requirements do overlap as far as the controls you may have in place. So this is one where a lot of the access controls that you have in place are going to satisfy this domain. So we already know that you have a process in place, technical control for identifying users. And then let's elaborate more on the processes acting on behalf of users. For example, if I was to look in your Entra ID, or look at your, are there any rogue service accounts or any service accounts, for example, that are not assigned to the individual user? Or any automated processes like backup?
From an Entra ID perspective, we use, enterprise apps and service principals. So they're managed identities. So, whether they're, programmatically done through maybe some implementation that we've done, or we're manually creating, for instance, let's say we wanted to create some automated process to make some changes, we will use a managed identity, and have Microsoft, use the platform as is intended, for anything that's Active Directory related. We do have a standard approach, and we have a standard naming convention, standard way we create accounts. Those accounts are, given the rights that they need to do, whether it's, schedule a task or stop services. And then we use a platform from Delinea to manage those identities. So those passwords get rotated on, however, weekly, monthly, and the platform then turns around and actually, restarts the service or restarts the task. So it automates the whole management of Active Directory accounts when we need to create those types of service accounts.
Okay, understood. Now, going back to the allowing employees to enroll their personal devices to access email.
Mhm.
As an organization, do y'all have any concerns around privacy issues that may occur with that, as far as having Intune kind of managing their personal devices?
Um, I would say, I mean, I personally, I don't have a problem, but yes, there was always a concern, of course, that let me back up. Yes, the employees culturally there were concerns, but it's all documented, and that we don't have access to their personal environment. Like I mentioned, we use application protection policies, so if we do have to wipe our data, we will only touch our data. We can't wipe their device. We can't see, their location. We can't see anything that's on their device. Because the way the enrollment process works.
Okay.
If it was a corporate device, yes, we have access to, what's on there, and we can push data out. But again, culturally, yes, we had to overcome that IT can't spy on that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, thank you for sharing that overview in regards to assessment objective C. So in Intune, if I were to look at the users or the devices that are authorized to access their email, would I see any what's the naming convention? Would be clear to be able to identify that this phone is assigned to Bob Smith versus like some nickname or alias or
Yeah, the way it works is the process of enrolling your device, whether it's personal or not. You have to use your user account. So from a management perspective, I see whose device, who's using what device, who's the enrolled user. But then we also have our asset management system. So we, when it comes to mobile devices, there's a process, from the procurement to the actual deployment of the device. So we do manage, or at least we control, or at least we manage our asset inventory in a separate system. And but only those, again, we can identify who's using what to access what using Intune and Sentinel, etc.
Okay, excellent. All right, and I think it is feasible, a viable approach to allow at level 1 to allow employees to access email on their personal devices, as long as you have those technical controls that you've outlined, like managing it through mobile device management solution, having them enroll. But at level 2, it becomes a lot more cumbersome. So this is a heads up, and they want to reconsider that as far as if CUI is going to be in scope with any of those personal devices at level 2, because it's just going to be we get a lot of pushback from those employees on what.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's something. I mean, again, just like any major change, MFA enrollment. Culturally, there's going to be a concern. But yeah, I think we're accustomed to understanding that we're going to be, those that are working on those projects are going to be what we consider swivel seats. There'll be different identities. They'll probably and of course, they probably can't access that environment. Thank you very much. They won't be able to access the environment unless it's a Pinoni machine. I'm sorry, it's a Titan machine, and then of course even the endpoint's going to probably have stricter controls on it.
Okay, understood. Makes sense. All right, well, yeah, moving right along in regards to, and apologize if you already mentioned it, but can you give me a high-level overview of what that onboarding process looks like for a new employee getting access to their in-scope systems?
Once they accept their offer, IT gets alert, and that kind of keys those off when it comes to the procurement process, actually purchasing and building workstations. But from the identity perspective, that information flows through HR. That gets passed to our systems, and in this case, Active Directory, where the accounts get created. Based on the role, they get entered into certain groups. You know, and then they get a random, you know, password, and then all that's tracked in our ticketing system so that the onboarding process is handled by a member of the IT team, you know, as far as first day login, getting them MFA'd and everything, and then we kind of hand them all off to operations. You know, and vice versa when it comes to the offboarding process. Once they're terminated, however they're terminated, we know there's an alert that gets generated, and then we immediately go through the offboarding process, and all that stuff's automated. So there's a series of things that we remove: groups, access rights, etc., resetting their passwords, disabling their account, and then informing the manager.
Okay, sounds pretty robust. Excellent. And very robust. Okay, let's see what the audience thinks in regards to meeting the IA requirements. Let's launch the poll. So did Titan Civil Engineering satisfy the IA requirements? Met, not met, or unsure? There are 2 requirements to level 1. And again, there's a lot of overlap with the access control. But it sounds like Titan Civil Engineering has some very robust, mature processes in place, both technical and administrative controls. All right, look like you're at 100% met, Chris. All right, moving right along. You're rocking and rolling. Hopefully this is not painful for you. All right, so for media protection, you only have 1 requirement for media protection. I know we talked earlier about potentially with FCI being stored on thumb drives and other hardware or within email. So this requirement really addresses how are you handling any physical devices like laptops, thumb drives, or anything like that, making sure that you're sanitizing it before reuse or disposal.
So as far as disposal, our process, you know, once we deem a asset to be retired, we do work with a third party. So, you know, based on, you know, how much we accumulate, we'll call the third party, who then will, you know, collect the machines and provide us a certificate of destruction, using some DoD standards, to prove that they have destroyed the devices. When it comes to reuse, we have just started implementing a solution to zero out the drives, and then before we re-image them. As far as any, as far as USB devices, we have yet to come up with a foolproof policy, but we're thinking about maybe providing authorized devices that we can then, you know, leverage the encryption features for that come with Intune.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, this is a good example as far as the role playing of this mock assessment. Yeah, there are going to be requirements that the OSA doesn't fully satisfy. The way to do that, how Chris just demonstrated, I say, hey, we don't satisfy the requirement at this point in regards to thumb drives, but this is on our roadmap, or this is some solutions we are considering. So, well done there, Chris. All right. So let's move on to physical protection. I know y'all mentioned you have several offices, and how are you handling the physical protection of those facilities? Physical access to FCI, whether those are printouts of the blueprints, the laptops, whatever's in scope from a physical standpoint. This is where we'll get a better idea of your physical controls.
Mm-hmm. So as far as physical controls, I mean, obviously there's some plans that get printed out. I mean, we try to keep the, you know, any FCI data in a certain area that only authorized individuals. But like I mentioned earlier, we're full scope, so anybody can access the environment. I mean, as far as the actual employees, we protect that physical area. In this case, the office. You know, through our our policy, which is, we have to escort and we have to log and escort visitors. So anybody that comes to one of our offices, they have to sign in to a book, a little low tech, and then of course they will be escorted to the area that they need to be, whether by somebody who meets them in front or the actual person they're visiting, so we know who's coming and going, to the environment. As far as the equipment, servers are locked. I mean, servers and networking equipments are locked, and only authorized people have the key to those areas, whether they're physical locks, whether they're electric locks. Those areas are locked down.
Okay. All right. Now I know with being civil engineers, you're all on site, I'm sure, a lot of times. How are you? Let's say you have engineers have some blueprints with them that's considered FCI. How are they controlling the access to those, making sure that just random people don't have access?
Well, that's it's a good question. I mean, that's something that I don't know if we really have a formal policy, but yeah, they should definitely we expect to take they're doing due diligence and ensuring that those plans aren't being exposed to anybody outside. So I think that's something that we're gonna have to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, as far as visitors, I know you already mentioned the visitors are escorted, and then so if someone visits your office, who handles as far as signing them in and escorting, assigning them an escort? Does that flow?
It all depends because of the office. I mean, there's many offices, so some offices have somebody in the front desk. Those that don't have somebody in the front desk, the door is locked. Therefore, they have to ring a bell. So somebody will eventually come out and let them in, show them the book, let them sign in, and then of course continue escorting them to that area. So it's either, again, admin in front or locked door.
Okay. All right. And who manages the retention of those sign-in sheets? And for how long are you retaining them?
Policy just started, so I would say, I couldn't really. I mean, we haven't defined how long we'll keep them, but so it's going to probably be most likely fall under our data retention policies, which could be up to 10 years. But the procedure right now is because we're using physical books, is taking photos of those pages.
Okay, and then when someone is signing in, is there a process for verifying that their person's identity and making sure they're not signing in, for example, as Mickey Mouse or something like that they are, they say they are?
I mean, we're not asking for ID, if that's what you're asking. You know what I mean? So, but again, the person is going to be escorted. So if I'm Bob and I sign the book as Bob, and Bob's supposed to see Jill, I imagine Jill knows that that's Bob. Mm-hmm.
Understood. Got it. And then as far as physical access devices, keys, cat card readers, how do you manage those in the case you need to revoke them, say a terminated employee or something like that?
So those offices that have electronic key, whether they're badges or cell phones, those, it's easier because once they're disabled, we could use single sign-on. So of course their electronic access gets revoked.
Okay.
The procedures, for those that don't have those electronic cards, part of the offboarding procedures immediately gets kicked in, and there's a procedure where the manager has to collect all their assets, including their physical keys if they have them. So they have to collect their computers, phones, etc., and then of course any kind of key access. But anything that's electronic gets revoked right away.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to system and communication protection. See this first one, boundary protection. We have a lot of assessment objectives. This is one that's pretty comprehensive, but how does Titan Civil Engineering define the external and internal boundaries for your FCI system?
Through diagram.
Okay.
We kind of diagram, exactly, what consists of our internal environment, whether it's virtual or not, and what doesn't.
Okay. So you have your network diagram. Do you also have a data flow diagram?
We're building that out. That's
Okay.
really, but that's really, we're kind of focusing that on level 2, but as far as, how data comes in, it's, again, full scope. So it's kind of like, all data, because there's a lot of data, or is it just FCI data? So that's something we're working on. Okay.
And then in regards to monitoring those key internal boundaries, what type of monitoring do you have in place?
We have a combination. We use, again, our firewalls, any system that we have that logs centrally. We have SIM. We use Sentinel, Microsoft Sentinel as our SIM. So logins, network flows, anything that we can feed it, we give it. And then we have a third-party MSP or SOC that helps us tune that environment. So things get escalated depending on what, the severity. As far as the flow of data or types of data, whether they're sensitive or not, we also use Microsoft Purview. So we can classify, what type of data or create classifications so that we can apply certain rules to certain data. For instance, based on the sensitivity, we can prevent, data from being printed or documents being forwarded based on maybe forced encryption based on the certain tags or of the documents.
Okay, all right. And what about the access system separation? So far as those publicly accessible systems like your website or any servers, do you have like a DMZ set up?
Yeah. So again, probably a combination of most of our publicly faced, or actually pretty much most of it is hosted in Azure. So we use Azure Firewall, and then depending on what type of external facing system, we'll leverage everything that Azure has, application proxies, application gateways, but no public facing system is as accessible without a firewall rule. We're not, FTP site or like that. Yeah, that's all. Everything is isolated in its own subnet, and then we kind of use Microsoft's architecture reference to build out the environment. So it's kind of like a hub and spoke with the firewall in the middle.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, good to follow those widely accepted best practices. Need to reinvent the wheel, so that's reassuring to know. Following the Microsoft architecture framework, and then as far as just to confirm with all your physical offices, there is going to be some type of boundary between where visitors are when they just first enter and the work location or areas.
For the most, I would say I'm trying to remember the top of my head. Most of every office has a front desk. So that area, whether big or small, whether there's a chair or not, they have to meet somebody or or there's a desk, whether it's manned or not, whether there's a person there or not. But again, they can't just walk in, and then we'll be in. You can't just walk in and be in the production area.
Okay, that's what I want to confirm. So if I showed up to one of the offices today, I couldn't just freely go exploring around your office.
No.
Access FCI. Excellent. All right. So we're almost wrapping it up. We're going to close out with a couple of the ones around antivirus, anti-malware. So I know you use a lot of Microsoft products in the Intune. I imagine you're using Defender as well. Is that correct?
We're actually using a combination. We actually use CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike's our primary EDR, and we actually do the CrowdStrike Complete. So it's kind of managed MDR. MD, of course, is installed on our devices. Of course, we're not using the anti-malware or antivirus functions. Of course, we're not doubling up. However, MD does provide a lot of telemetry to our Sentinel environment, and it's required for purview because it has to be able to read those documents to determine what to do with them.
Excellent. And just to confirm,
CrowdStrike's. I mean, CrowdStrike's installed everywhere. Windows, Linux.
Okay, and those updates are continuous, right? Or the
as long as they don't crash the computers, they're
yeah. Got it. All right, so last one. You can see light at the end of the tunnel. Chris, you're doing great. So let's say this as far as system and file scanning. Let's say I insert that USB drive into the laptop. Is it being scanned, or if I'm downloading an attachment?
On access scan is what's set up. So if you try to access a document, whatever it is, it's going to get scanned. Whether it's whether you insert a drive or mount a drive, it's going to get scanned. And of course, if I touch a file anywhere, it's going to get scanned.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Well, we've made it through all the requirements based on the information you provide me. I know there's going to be some follow-up. I think there's a couple requirements that I'll need to add to the POAM. For level 1, there's not a POAM, but since you're bringing me in as an assessor just to help you all complete your level 1, I can work with you on remediating those outstanding issues. Like one, we want to maybe incorporate the incident response trigger for the getting FCI on. If FCI is discovered on your public-facing systems, we want to make sure we have a process for the thumb drives, external hard drives, how we're sanitizing those. A couple other things, but overall, I think you all are in a good position. Titan Civil Engineering has a lot of robust technical controls. I think just some areas of improvement is going to be more of those administrative controls. But yeah, we're in really good shape. So I think we'll be able to submit that level 1 self-assessment to Spurs probably within the next couple of weeks with a high level of assurance once we wrap up those outstanding items. But as far as outside of that, Chris, I want to definitely applaud you. You did a really good job holding it down as the only representative from Titan Civil Engineering. You're on the hot seat the whole hour. Hopefully it wasn't too painful for you. Yeah, really, really appreciate you getting some play time in, getting the feel. So what are your thoughts? Do you think as far as what the level of rigor, and it can give you a good feel of what level of rigor should be applied when you're doing that internal self-assessment for level 1?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, obviously the assessment guide has been of value, and we didn't have that a few years ago, but there's so much, in a way, I guess, interpretation, so even internally, we have these discussions as far as what exactly are they looking for? I mean, obviously compliance, I think we all agree is really the floor, and that's really not where we want to shoot for. Right. But sometimes we get hung up when it comes to some of these controls because we're like, well, it says we should do this, but we should really be doing this, and then it's just like, okay, well, and of course the business, wants, we need to be certified. And it's like, it's not something that we can check. It's an ongoing thing. I can't sit here and say I got antivirus and I'm good for the next year. I got to do everything else, to care and feed or something like that. So another challenge that we've had is the things that don't really fall under IT. Like physical security. HR, like the controls that we talked about as far as post to public data. Those things sometimes are challenging because, again, the interpretation of what the control means, and it's just like, hey, well, I don't really have total control over that, so now I need to go back and say, you need to provide this evidence or procedure that I don't have control over. So anyway, so it's good that you guys put this together because again, it's it may not be as bad as some people may think it is.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, with compliance and these requirements, there's room for interpretation, and really ultimately the intent. Are you trying to meet the spirit and intent of the requirement? That can be done in multiple ways. 80171 is not prescriptive. It's not telling you how you have to do it or what specific solutions you have to use. So just factor that in. And then another challenge is CMMC is aligned with revision 2 for 80171. So we know there's a revision 3 out now that's addressing a lot of the more current threats and newer technology, but I'm kind of stuck with the old requirements. That's just one of the things we just have to navigate. But in these last couple of minutes, I'll invite anyone, any of the attendees want to come off mute, provide any feedback, ask any questions before we let Chris off the hot seat.
I just had a quick question that I might have picked up something that wasn't there, but for the external connection control. So, we've got it documented, FTP external systems that we use and things like that, but more specifically for level 2, what kind of documentation or controls would need to be in place just for like websites? So we've got basically, people are open to use the internet as they see appropriate. We do have a policy just defining what the acceptable use is, but we don't whitelist specific websites by any means. We do have geolocation blocking, things like that, but outside of that, that's just kind of up to the user to understand what is work appropriate.
And I know there is a lot of, I won't say it's not a consensus yet to what extent that documentation needs to be, or how extensive that whitelist needs to be. But an example is at level 2, where you're at least going to have the authorized programs, applications that can be installed on the system, for example. That needs to be documented. And then with the external connections, being able to identify whether it's through the firewall, however you're identifying, or proxy, however you're identifying whatever that in-scope system, the external connections it's making. In my opinion, you don't need to have everyone documented, but you do need to have that ability to identify those external connections, and make a best effort to identify which systems that in-scope, let's say CUI asset, that laptop is authorized to access. And that's going back to the point where it is a good idea to do enclave versus having the entire business in scope if they're not involved in CUI handling, because CMMC, especially level 2, is very restrictive. So it can be very cumbersome trying to impose those restrictions on someone who doesn't even handle CUI. A big challenge. And we're already at the top of the hour. All right, thank you all. Thank you very much, Chris. You did an excellent job, rock star. So we're doing a round of applause. I'll be sending out the recording for this session sometime, probably next week, and publish on our YouTube channel. And invite anyone who hasn't played yet, sign up to play. If not, just have fun. That's the only rule. Role play. Thank you all, and thanks for joining.
Thank you.